Hey, so today I wanted to talk about the idea of decentralization. And when most people think about decentralization, I think that they really think about government, and um, particularly, I mean, the U.S. is probably one of the most famous examples of that. But I think that decentralization kind of applies to a lot of different things. And so I just kind of wanted to go over my points and kind of um, just talk about kind of what my thoughts on the matter were. So, as far as decentralized governments go, the um, I guess kind of the start of decentralizing governments that most people would consider somewhat decentralized is the idea of democracy, which would be the Athenian democracy, fourth or fifth century BC, um, is when they um, date that to, and that's kind of like a partially decentralized because you still have a centralized government, but you have a kind of voting, a democratic voting system is somewhat decentralized um, decision making. Like you still have the government, but uh, some of the power is decentralized to the people because of voting. And then there's an interesting one that I don't know much about, and there's uh, not a ton of info on, is the Iroquois Confederacy. So it was in the 12th and 15th century sometime. They think it started, and it's a bunch of different tribes um, that kind of had a similar thing going on like the US did. They had their own governance among themselves, but all cooperated with each other for like a grander governance. And so that's kind of another form of decentralized government, and kind of is kind of the natural state of how things have normally been. If you think of humans as hunter-gatherers living in small tribes and stuff. And so America was really the first country to form a decentralized government with the idea of the states, in the end ended up being 50 states. Um, and they had the federal government, which was the centralized government in the US, in the 50 state governments, all independent from each other. And the federal government itself was divided into three branches to decentralize power within the central government of the US. So the idea was um, to not let one entity hold too much power. Obviously, that's what most people talk about when they're talking about decentralizing, is um, uh, making sure that all of something is not held under one entity. So uh, the founders were very adamant about keeping power decentralized. The um, uh, James Madison, um, he has a quote here from the Federalist Papers, number 10. Um, the power delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain to the state governments are numerous and indefinite. And so that's just um, he's just making the point that the federal government needs to be explicitly limited in its capabilities, um, uh, so that it gives more power to the decentralized system of state government. Um, and then Alexander Hamilton uh, has a quote here, also from Federalist Papers, that goes, "If the representatives of the poor, if the representatives of the people betray their constituents, there is no resource left but in the exertion of that original right of self-defense which is paramount to all forms of government. So this is kind of another idea that was the first in that I know of, at least, came about in the U.S. is the right to bear arms, right, in our Constitution. And it's kind of um, uh, a it's a serious underpinning for the idea of decentralized power, because ultimately the idea of power is ultimately predicated on force, right? Somebody, uh, if they cannot force you to do something using, you know, ultimately force, then they don't have power over you. So the idea of limiting the government's power by protecting the right of people to use force against the tyrannical government was definitely a profound idea in the creation of the U.S. For the fact that it does limit power being centralized. And so I kind of wanted to go back to this natural state of humanity thing. So humans as hunter-gatherers lived in very small communities, tribal communities, and the new found idea of the massive nation state is very it's very new, and it's also a pretty an anomaly if you look through human history. So estimates, on the idea of human civilization, 95 to 99% of human existence, we've been in small tribal groups, and only 5 to 1% of the time we've existed, humans have lived in these massive nation states. And so with the the idea of centralized power, I think, is somewhat foreign from an evolutionary standpoint. And I think our natural state is to have small localized government because of the history of us in small tribal groups. The libertarian point of view is pretty reflective of that, I think. I think it's kind of a more tribalistic point of view. Not tribalistic, but the point of view that a tribal community would have, it would be more libertarian, mostly as far as the idea of very localized small government. Of course, the other part of libertarianism is minimal intervention, government intervention, which is you know, may or may not pertain to different tribal groups. I'm not sure how many of them had the ideas of limited government interaction with people, and the idea of personal liberty as well. I'm not sure where they weigh in that way. Obviously, the ultimate conclusion of the logic of decentralized government would be anarchy, where nobody has authority over you, and you don't have authority over anybody else. And so it's the idea of complete personal autonomy is kind of the anarchical point of view. But besides government, I think that humans have tended to move towards centralized power in governance, as we've seen these, uh, you know, the creation of these massive states these big nation states with centralized government, and even the U.S. has become very centralized government, with the federal government growing so big. But the um, thing I wanted to kind of talk about was that there's a lot of other things that have become decentralized in a way throughout history, and particularly in the last handful of years, um, especially the last 50 years, there's been a massive push towards decentralization. So, kind of to start back about 100 years ago, the Industrial Revolution um, made a massive change uh, in a type of decentralization. The ability, um, the access and availability of goods was massively changed by the Industrial Revolution. Using machines and factories to generate goods and products um, not only made them more available by increasing the supply of them so more people could access them, but it also incredibly affected the cost of these things so that more people had access to them. And when you have a shop making a product, for example, and you're hand making everything, um, it takes an incredible amount of time. And so to make it uh, cost effective for the um, customer, the factory and assembly line process, and other mechanized means of uh, converting work from labor to machines was necessary to make it more accessible. Just for a craftsman to make a living, they have to charge a price that a lot of people would find high. You know, um, the probably biggest example of this was Henry Ford with the Model T. Henry Ford invented the assembly line and had an entire process going into his automotive industry that really revolutionized the cost that it took to produce an automobile. Uh, the Model T, I want to say, was $260 um, to buy one, and a hand-built car and automobile of the time, uh, most of which were built for only rich people because only rich people could afford them. The cost of that would be in the thousands of dollars, most likely over $10,000 for a hand-built automobile from Cadillac or Rolls-Royce, Duesenberg, any of those makers that were hand building the cars. And so Henry Ford's assembly line really decentralized access and affordability of the automotive industry and forced other companies to compete. Um, and then another thing, one of the things that I think is most fascinating about our current age, but it's actually been going on quite a while, a few hundred years at least, um, is information. So the printing press really started to decentralize information by making it possible to print books cheaply. And so it goes back to the idea of uh, decentralizing accessibility, because if you can print a book cheap, more people can buy it. And the other thing that the printing press did was it allowed more people to uh, print their own books, because you didn't have to hire scribes to handwrite every single line, which was incredibly expensive. Um, so more people could put information out and their new ideas out. And so the printing press really um, uh, revolutionized information in its time. The other thing is, continuing on that same line, when the um, mail systems got started and improved upon, and now we kind of have the end version of that, which is the U.S. mail system. If as long as you're talking about snail mail, um, it really revolutionized communication. The passing of information, um, and that's why I kind of want to lump information and communication together because they are very um, linked in the fact that communication is kind of just the verb of information. Um, Information is knowledge, but communication is the transfer of that information. So the telephone came along, that made it even more immediate to be able to communicate and convey information to people. And then as you got radio and television as well, they continued on that path of kind of decentralizing the information system from just uh, a few people who held all the information um, to uh, large groups of people. And you can think of the schooling system in the same way. I tend to kind of argue that it is different though because it still had central control most of the time. There, um, there was private schools and stuff like that, but as far as the schooling system itself, um, they were almost always had centralized control. Um, so even though it's the distribution of information, it's not a decentralized version of it. Um, and then something huge happened in the late 20th century, which was that the internet started to come out. And as we've all seen, I guess depending on your age, maybe you haven't noticed it as much, but I think even in the last handful of years, we've seen this exponential growth in the internet's ability to decentralize access to information and decentralize the um, potential to release information as well, just like I'm doing now. Anybody can go um, put their information out there and anybody else can find it. And we really saw the effects of this decentralization of information and communication because the internet really revolutionized both those aspects in this last election. Like we've been seeing it for a while, but I think it really hit home to a lot of people in this last election um, when you saw these. Also during the pandemic, the major um, the major institutions uh, were not were not able to control the flow of information the way they wanted to. There was just too many holes in the boat to plug, you know. Um, and so the majority of people were able to access the information that they were looking for. It was just too overpowering, you know. Um, and I think that's been a massive uh, positive in the uh, I think it's a massive positive for the human race, honestly. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about was is cryptocurrency. So particularly Bitcoin, because um, I don't know a lot about cryptocurrency, but as far as I know, it's the only one that uses a decentralized system of um, functioning. The uh, Bitcoin system is ran on by thousands of different users instead of by one centralized company. And so what that does is if there's an issue, it's hard for the issue to affect the system at large because the uh, system is not located in one spot. So you would have to get into every one of these thousands of systems to have a major effect. where with a centralized company, if you were able to hack it or something, you could have a major effect pretty quickly because of the centralized access. The other thing is the idea of control. So, like, if you have thousands of people and they wanted to screw up Bitcoin, but somehow, like, let's say, um, let's say they wanted to print a trillion more Bitcoin and just crash the value of Bitcoin. Now, a company that had a centralized control over the Bitcoin currency could do that, but the likelihood of it happening with Bitcoin is way lower because you would have to get thousands of people to all modify their systems to, uh, you know, cause this increase in the currency amount um, to crash the value of it. So it's a hedge against inflation, and that's why a lot of people buy Bitcoin is because as the dollar inflates, Bitcoin does not. So its value goes up in respect to the dollar, and so it's a hedge against inflation in that way. And I think that can be another powerful lever. If we had a decentralized currency here in the U.S., not only would the government not have control over um, the leverages associated with a centralized currency, like being able to print any money they want, which means they can spend as much as they want, and it's just laid on the backs of the taxpayers, but um, also a centralized currency and banking system, you know, would allow them to, seize your funds as well, like we saw in Canada with during the trucker rally and stuff. And so I think a decentralized currency would be a massive step. Definitely one of the most powerful things alongside the decentralization of force that the Second Amendment tries to give us, the decentralization of information, and the decentralization of trade control that a decentralized currency would give us is, I think, one of the biggest levers to pull in uh, in the pursuit of having a populace that is in control of its own destiny. The other thing that I thought was interesting was what people call the gig economy. So you have things like Uber, Lyft, um, DoorDash. Um, you have all these um, companies that are basically what they're doing is they're setting up a job between a customer and a contractor. That's basically what they do. And it allows this kind of freedom for contractors, right? Private contractors. And so that's kind of the same way I think about the gig economy is it's easing the accessibility to private contractors. Now, this is kind of where the what I'm picturing is going to happen soon here with the advent of AI, the um, more and more widespread use of it, um, and also the fact that more companies are uh, building AI. There's lots of companies building AI, lots of countries building AI, and a lot of these companies, there's been a precedent set now. A lot of these companies are allowing access, free access, a lot of the times to use of their AI, to a limited use, and then they'll have usually paid subscriptions and stuff for a little more access, and then they'll work with companies as well to use their AI, and I'm sure they're charging much more for that kind of situation if you're running a system that you're profiting off of I'm sure that you have to pay a substantially large amount to the company who AI you're utilizing to run your system. Now, what I think is fascinating and um, very uh, um, uh, what I think is fascinating and very exciting about this AI revolution, and the fact that people have so much access to it, the common person has so much access to it, is I'm kind of curious if artificial intelligence is going to somewhat decentralize intelligence itself. And think about it this way. Um, you kind of have a brain. If you have access to AI, you have a brain outside your body um, that can be extremely powerful for problem solving and information gathering, right? Now, it does only, it is only as valuable as you make it. So the smarter you are, or the more uh, capable you are to use AI well, the more it's going to benefit you. So there is somewhat of a caveat there, but that kind of is applied to the idea of the internet as well. Um, if you are not intelligent enough, or you are not motivated enough to um, seek out quality information, then the um, access to information that the internet gives you isn't going to help you. And so it's it's similar to the internet in that way, that it is a supplemental IQ for people, but it is relying on you to um, use that as well. We haven't quite got to the point yet of uh, literally putting artificial intelligence in people's brains yet, but that is something that can happen down the line. And one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is intelligence has always been one of the most valuable uh, attributes that a human can have, because intelligent people innovate. The other aspect of that, though, is creativity. And with the idea of AI being extremely intelligent, and the idea that it's supplementing everybody's intelligence, creativity might start to become a more valuable commodity than intelligence, whereas they were probably pretty close together um, before, if intelligence was not more, right? And uh, unless and until artificial intelligence starts uh, becoming truly creative as well, then possibly it could decentralize creativity um, as well, and give everybody a supplemental brain that is both unbelievably intelligent and unbelievably creative. Um, and so, uh, the kind of my point of view on this, and kind of where I hope this is going, is that these fundamentals of human existence, I guess, human nature, the idea um, of decentralizing information, intelligence, possibly creativity if we get there, those are all things that has made humanity into the alpha species on Earth. And the idea that you can distribute that evenly to everybody and give everybody access to those things, um, I think those things will automatically start to decentralize power, because um, just like we've seen with the internet, I think it's already started to do that because, um, the internet has already made propaganda extremely hard to do to um, any moderately educated or I guess educated is not the right word to use. Any moderately intelligent person can easily see through most propaganda nowadays by just doing a little bit of research on the internet. And almost everybody has access to the internet nowadays. And so I kind of think artificial intelligence might do the same thing, especially if it keeps this trend of being accessible to everybody. And I'm just excited to see where that goes. So, if you enjoyed kind of listening to my thoughts about this whole idea, um, go ahead and leave a comment. Tell me what you think, if I'm right or wrong, or maybe halfway right. Just go ahead and let me know. And thanks for watching.